Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we try to bring you stories of people who are making a difference in the world locally, globally, and digitally. Now, our club, the Rotary Club of Silicon Valley, is one of 36,000 Rotary clubs around the world. Part of Rotary International, service above self, making the world a better place, right? 1.4 million Rotarians and Rotaractors who are dedicated to seeing great things happen. And from our point of view, getting these stories in such a way that it inspires people to see new and interesting ways to improve what happens is something that we just love. We love that our flexibility as an online and asynchronous club allows us to do that. Today, you are going to hear from the founder of harkness.ai. And this is a system that once described to me made me go, wow, because it appealed to my interest in tech stuff, my interest in language, my interest in data, all kinds of cool things. So I'm quite certain you're going to be walking away from this one with a, whoa, that was interesting. And to prove that, we'll hand it over to the speaker. You read his bio coming in. He went to a very, very impressive and fine university in San Antonio, Texas, Trinity University. Go Tigers. Anybody else on the call went to Trinity? Oh, me. How about that? All right. So with that, I am really, really happy to see a fellow Tiger in the group. So Jason, welcome. Great to have you. Take it away.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me. It's a tremendous honor to be here with this group. So as Rushton said, my name is Jason Brooks. I am born and raised in the beautiful city of Los Angeles, California. And just sort of a backstory on how I got here. I grew up late 80s, early 90s in Watts, which is right next to Compton, South Central LA, which was at that time a really rough neighborhood in the city of LA. To give you a sense of just sort of the daily rhythms. I was 7 at my 7th birthday party. It was the first time I saw somebody get shot and killed. Police brutality was a daily sort of occurrence, and then all with the backdrop of sort of gang violence as well. So feel very, very, very fortunate to have made it out of that environment. But I'll never forget, I was 13 years old. I was playing basketball. My mom grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and said, you're going to take a test. And I was like, but I want to finish the game. She said, you're going to take a test. And then little did I know is that test, I ended up at an all-boys boarding school in Claremont, California. And there I was exposed to amazing, amazing teachers and really high octane classmates. And the way that we were taught was in the Harkness method. So around a table, excellent professors only asked us questions, and our classmates, we all responded, right? So for example, when you'd ask, hey, what's my grade? Professors would say, what do you think your grade should be? I was like, well, I think it should be an A. Well, why do you think it should be an A? Well, because I worked hard. Do you think that working hard is you should be rewarded because you worked hard? And I was like, what? I just want the A. So fast forward 4 years, graduated from there, went to Trinity in San Antonio, Texas, ran track, played lacrosse, was a Spanish and American history and a Mandarin minor. And very dutifully after graduation became a classroom teacher, because I knew three things after I graduated. I love to learn, I love sports, and I really liked kids. So for 18 years, I taught. And like I said, very dutifully as a first generation student, was a classroom teacher, then a world language department chair, then a dean of students, dean of faculty, head of school, head of upper school, and then head of school. And then I imagine we'll all have sort of these stories at some point. But then in the spring of 2020, let's talk about it, COVID hit and totally changed my life. So I went from really having a deep in-person connection with my students to being met with muted mics and blank video feeds, trying to understand how am I going to connect with my students, how am I going to connect with my faculty, how am I going to serve my students, how am I going to serve my faculty, being able to see an unprecedented view into students' home life, being able to hear students who are taking classes in a closet with all of their siblings back to back and just chaos compared to other students who are at their third or second family home, sort of in this palatial setup. Just taken in class. So that really changed me as a person. And as Rushton said, one of the things that I've done in terms of my academic career was I was able to be on a linguistics research team at Harvard during my graduate studies. And then there, I was also exposed to data science and machine learning. So one of the things that I started to do by hand, just to kind of get a control of where students were, is by, and you can see this is a year and a half's worth of data, but I started by hand taking or keeping track of student interaction. And that totally transformed the way that my students and I interacted. And I'll kind of share with you now so you can see. All right. Cool. Yeah, so here's a photo of me in the midst of 2020. And we all have to remember, this is pre-vaccine. We all didn't know, we were all still stuck in our houses. And I was met with muted mics and blank video feeds, trying to connect with my students. So then by hand, I charted interaction, and a few things really jumped off the page. One, you can just sort of see who interacts with whom, who didn't interact with whom. And I'll never forget, there was a young lady where she said, "Mr. Brooks, all the baseball boys only talk to each other. And if you don't do something about it, I will." And I believed her in that moment. And in that moment, there's a transformation that happened in our classroom, right? There was an awareness that invited the change. There was an awareness that totally transformed how we were doing. So I knew I had a nugget of something, and I knew that this was really transforming the way that education was done. I knew it was transforming the way that we interacted in the online space. So then I reached out to, ironically enough, a former student to sort of help me build this platform. So I had the backend technology, and then reached out to Evan Ellison, who is a full stack engineer at Microsoft, and he helped build this application. And then very, very soon thereafter, we recruited Keenan Hale, who's our third co-founder, and that triumvirate has known each other for 18 years. I've known both of them since they were 13, and they were applying to another all-boys school that I taught at in Chattanooga, Tennessee, called the Macaulay School. So for about a year now, us three have been plugging away and really working hard to really make this solution that was born out of a global pandemic into a tool that folks can use across the world. So I'd like to, in the time I have left, sort of share with you a little bit of some of the findings that we're getting across the site. You'd imagine that with the volume of the data, not only are we seeing in the way that people interact is really quite curious in the online space, but also particularly the words that we use, the language we use, has certain effects, right? So we all come from our different cultural contexts. We all come from our different backgrounds. And our intention is to clearly communicate our backstories, what we want, our vision for the future. But the challenge is that there's a full range of emotion, and we all have culture that informs our linguistic choices. And too often, that culture can get caught up in a miscommunication. And because we come from different cultural contexts, we quite often miss each other. And sadly, a lot of folks lose their lives every day because of miscommunication. So to the extent that we can use this incredibly powerful technology in the form of AI and machine learning to help improve human communication, that's something that I really want to spend the rest of my life working on, and the team does too. So without further ado, I kind of run you through the top 10, almost in like the late night show, the top 10 phrases and their effects. So let's get right in here. I can't hold it back. I try really hard, but I'm a nerd at heart and I get really excited. So please apologize if that's not your thing. But we're seeing hedges, right? So one of the hedges that we see are just to. So you'll see people say just to build on what she said, and what that is actually doing. It's a polite way of saying, I'm going to do this thing that you might not immediately like, but I'm going to kind of do it anyway and do it first and then ask for permission later. So you see an example there just to try to make sense of it all. Another is kind of, and this is a really, really common, and it's a flexible hedge that has many purposes, right? So it's a filler. Sometimes it can be a signal of insecurity, and is often a softener. And you can compare those two differences between those two sentences. I'll be real with you, but just to kind of keep control over what's happening versus to keep control over what's happening. That second is far more direct. And the previous example, again, sort of softens the request. And then sort of is really interesting because we're using this to be able to predict psychological safety and how safe somebody feels within a group. And this is the strongest hedge. So when you hear it, be aware that person probably is expressing a significant insecurity in what they're saying. So you see this example here. I'd like to sort of get your thoughts on next steps versus I'd like to get your thoughts on next steps. And I'll be completely transparent when we're talking to investors. One of the things that happen, my sort of goes up, and it's directly correlated with how nervous I am. So as a team, as we debrief all these calls, if I see my sort of through the roof, I'll have to admit, because it's in the data, that I was a bit nervous on that call. So that's a bit. Power brokers are really quite interesting. So these are really subtle ways that folks will use phrases to broker power. So want to, something as simple as like, Serge, do you want to share your screen? In fact, Serge does not have a choice. If I'm asked to do something in this place, I gotta kind of do it. Otherwise, I'm the one who's perceived as a not nice person. So this want to is a really tone setting phrase. And users of the phrase usually use it to dictate a mood, a policy, or a standard. Have to, as you might imagine, signals obligation on the part of the speaker or their audience. So you can see some examples here. We just have to execute. In fact, that's really your opinion, but it's your opinion presented as a fact. And then you don't have to be the smartest in the room. Okay, and sometimes it really does make sense to be the smartest in the room. But again, opinion presented as fact. And then I think a really interesting way, and this is what we call the power hedge. So folks in power will often use this to soften a request. So you see this example here. Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier. We both know that you mentioned earlier, but you use that I think to sort of soften that request. And then this is quite interesting. I know my time is coming up, but I really want to get this in. What follows and is really important. So people who use and I in a narrative sense, and I went to the store, and I did this, and I did that, are perceived by others quite negatively. They're perceived as self-centered, unaware, and talk too much. So even when they talk the same amount as other people, if you use the phrase and I repeatedly, the perception is that not so great compared to and so. And so is very similar to and I, but and so what happens there is that because there's this anticipatory energy, if you use it too much, people are left frustrated because you want the denouement, you want the punchline. So if I say and so, and so, and so, and so, I'm waiting for the payoff of listening to your story. And then the last one around and this conjunction is and then. And it's a way to politely, and I use this all the time and my team makes fun of me, it's a way to hang on to the mic, the way to hang on to the control of the story in a way that continues and continues and continues. So I'm very aware of that. And then the last two are around future, right? The future state, going to very clearly sets a vision for the future. Today we're going to cover, going to share, going to be threatened, and usually folks who are giving instructions will use that. And then the last is when you, and this is almost synonymous with imagine because it's used to describe a version of the future as it was in the past. So when you think about, when you look at it this way, when we talk about it. So that's my story. I really appreciate you allowing me to share on behalf of our team. Our team is fantastic, and I always want to make sure that that's at the center of everything we do. But the last bit I'll just leave you with, knowing that for you all, service above self is the most important thing in the motto of Rotary. For us, awareness drives change. And to the extent that we can serve each other, all of the 8 billion folks on this planet, with an awareness, a self-effacing awareness that invites productive change. That's what I want to spend the rest of my life doing. So thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
All right, Jason, great stuff. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and de-share there, and we'll kind of jump into to first introducing the group that we have on the call. If you have your camera on, wave when I mention your name. If you have your camera off and need to leave it off, no judgment. So with that, let me kind of go through the group as I see them. First of all, our friend of the club from the Rotary Club of Eugene Metropolitan, Heather Edwards, up in Oregon. To my right or left, I don't know, existential question, kind of jumps into my head there, but that would be Phil Dean, who is in the Bay Area. Mike Kane, our club secretary, who is in the Sacramento area. Our guests, Keenan Hale, who featured in part of the story and part of the team, the founding team at harkness.ai, who is in the Washington, D.C. area. Jason, our speaker, is in Los Angeles. Shags, our paella master, is in Walnut Creek. Cecilia Babkirk, our treasurer, is in Italy. We have another friend of the club, Chris Cochran, who is based in Canada, and Jens, who is one of our how do I put it, Jens? Most tech-aware members of the club in terms of the fascinating work that he does, and I'll leave it at that, in Germany. So with that, I'd like to jump into the Q&A, and I'll start with a question that Heather has for you. So Heather, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Thank you, Rushton, and thank you, Jason and Keenan, for as someone who spends a lot of time on Zoom and of course in meetings, I'm super fascinated and I have a lot of questions. First one, I see that you taught Spanish and Mandarin, and I'm wondering what phrases you might have noticed in those languages.
It's a fantastic question. So when I taught Spanish, and I'm again here in LA, Sapir-Whorf writes the linguistic theory that sort of posits, based on the language that you teach, it can quite literally affect your brain. So Tenerke, which means to have to do something, quite literally obligates you to do something. So when you say, Mom, I have to, or yo tengo que, right? I have to do something. So you're putting yourself underneath the moral sort of impetus of whoever you speak with. So for me, as I have these different languages in my head, Spanish in particular, and then Mandarin, as you mentioned, and then Mandarin has what's called Chengyu, and I don't know your familiarity with Mandarin, but there are these 4 character phrases that often go back 2,000, 5,000 years. So you imagine there's some inertia around a Chengyu. So you can just say, for example, somebody comes in, does a certain thing, and then when in Rome, and then it'd be translated as when in Rome, but there are 5,000 years of Chinese examples that predate Rome in terms of its application. So it's quite interesting to speak in Mandarin because for so many different reasons. It's easy because there are very well-rutted ways of expressing things, but also quite difficult when you want to say something new, because when you have that, again, when you have that much history, there's a way to say things and you say them a certain way.
Very cool. And if I may, a second question, do you see gender trends with some of these words and phrases? The ones that I'm aware of, there's a woman who designed an app to, like a browser extension, to remove them from women's emails because we're so socialized to be polite in the workplace. Just is one of them. If I could just get you to send me those numbers, I'm sorry to trouble you, but all of these kind of preambles, right? So do you see these gender trends?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that is quite sobering and exciting, if that makes sense. So on average, across our platform, when a man runs a meeting, he will talk 52% of the time. On average, when a woman leads a meeting, she'll talk 33% of the time. And again, that's a small sample size, but our platform. We see all of the qualification that I've heard and that you just described in our data. And then last and sadly, I have 4 sisters and a mom, and you hear all of these stories around gender discrimination. I said that, and the guy right behind me said the same thing, and he got all the credit. And sadly, we're seeing that in the data as well as folks getting interrupted and talked over. And the last part of that is that it's exciting to be able to use these incredibly powerful tools to correct some of that behavior and really just bring it to light. And it's not your opinion anymore. It's not my opinion anymore. It's actually in the data. And now we can act on it because now we've mapped this behavior. And now it's up to you to sort of change that behavior because we know when and where and how it happened. So that's the part that gets me excited for the future of how humans interact.
Very cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Actually, I want to build on something that you were just talking about, Jason. So, you talk about what's in the data, and your presentation is very much one about language tics, as you call But I'd like you to talk about how that can get tracked in a system. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, which is probably itself a linguistic tech. If you would, just talk about how your system helps people do that. What's going on in Harkness AI that allows people to understand those issues?
Yeah, so there's a few layers of AI that sort of capture and figure out who's talking to whom at what point, and then we run a pretty comprehensive set of algorithms over each transcript, each conversation, to capture those individual trends and then plot them over time. So, for example, one of the words that are trending, the pair of words that are trending, are "you guys." So, sort of to tell my age, when I was growing up, my mom's from the Bronx, New York. She says "you use guys" all the time. That's a general way to sort of address a group, but for very, very good reasons. When you have mixed gendered company, "you guys" doesn't really work for that many people anymore. So to be able to say, hey, this is how you are using it both as an individual and as a group, we are able to automatically send that back to each individual person on a call. So again, the idea that everybody on the call will get automatic coaching, automatic feedback on the way they show up is really exciting, because even on this call, we have tremendous geographic diversity. One of the things that means is that if you have somebody from Tupelo, Mississippi, talking to somebody from Seattle, Washington, talking to somebody from the Bronx, New York, talking to somebody from Southern California, just at a baseline, we know that they all have different rates of speech, which then changes the propensity and the likelihood of interrupting, right? And then you layer on top of that culture. In some cultures, interrupting is incredibly rude. In other cultures, interrupting is a sign of engagement. So now that we have the data, we're able to track these things. We can sort of create a new norm around what that group will be the norm for that group. And the exciting part is that for every configuration of humans, that norm is going to be different, because now that we know how we're interacting, we can say, is this working for us or is this not? And that's the cool part, to be able to give these tools back to a group and say, you all decide. It's not my choice. We're just simply giving you a mirror and deciding, do you want to wear clothes or would you like to continue in your natural state? That choice is yours.
That's awesome. We've had a couple of really good questions come in through the chat. So let me read those. Mike in Sacramento says, how do you see your learnings being applied as best practices for the teacher and the teacher presenter, or as well as the students? And then how do you extend that into both, like if you think about primary and secondary education, college level education, and then the workforce, so non-college environments. So the kind of stuff that you're doing, are you looking at things that are also getting applied in different ways in those settings?
Yep. Well, one of the things that's really exciting, and frankly outside of our control at this point, is that people are using the tool in a variety of different ways. But what's really exciting around education in particular is that certainly the way that I was taught, not so much in high school, but certainly in college, was the sage on the stage. This person literally had a PhD. They had spent 6 to 10 years perfecting their knowledge of one subject and just talked at us 3 times a week for a couple hours. With the internet, that doesn't work anymore, because teachers and instructors are fact-checked in real time. So now that one person's knowledge sort of diminishes, and then the knowledge of the whole increases. So what we're seeing is that teachers and educators and facilitators are using this tool to really help improve facilitation, which we know is the future of work, which is the future of education, which is the future of teaching. Can I, as the teacher, as the leader of the group, get the best ideas from all of the group, get everybody in the group's participation, and we'll throw all of those ideas into the pot, and then the best idea will emerge from there. And that's a really exciting prospect, because it was how I was taught in high school. It's when I think back to the best conversations I've had in my life, it's this really robust back and forth wrestling. Well, I think about it this way. We'll throw in this idea. Well, no, actually, this is an idea. And then the group comes to a collection, versus we've all spoken with really bright people, and it's very clear that you're bright. But that's not a conversation. And if I'm just going to listen to a bright person, I should read a book, podcast, video, etc. That's one-way communication. But this now really creates multi-dimensional communication, which is exciting.
All right. Speaking of that data that allows you to make those decisions, Cecilia asks how you use the data. So, I mean, a lot of information coming in from looking at a lot of different conversations in a number of different settings and all. Is that data that you share in some way? Is that how do you use the data that you get as a part of the system?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we as a company, in terms of the business sense, only use the data to make the platform better, to deliver better results for our customers. But then a big part of being at the forefront of human history is that you got to educate people on what you're doing. So to the extent that we can get out and educate folks on here's what's happening globally across our platform, here's what's happening in your meetings, here's the effect of using this language versus that, here's the effect of including this person versus that person, is a big part of how we use the data. So to answer your question, Cecilia, it's really about synthesizing reams of data into really simple sort of kindergarten rules, right? And this is the part around software as a service, is that we can deliver as a service kindergarten rules. Be nice to people, include people, and don't be a jerk. And you'd be surprised how far that gets you. But now to have that feedback in this sort of virtual setting allows us to really execute on those ideas that have been with us since we were 4 or 5. So there you go.
Cool. All right. Last question before we wind down, then, of course, to the audience. So, because we're part of the recording, we get to keep talking to these guys. How good is our lives, right? So last question then, tell us a little bit more about your business model. So how do you engage with customers? How do you deliver these solutions in the parlance? How do you connect with people who are interested in having their Zoom meetings or video conference meetings, perhaps it's larger than Zoom, right? Really analyzed in this way so people can really begin to talk about how they communicate in their settings.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the best place to do that is just our website, harkness.ai. And then we're part of a movement where we're software as a service. So we give the tools to you and allow folks to use it that way. And we've intentionally built it to be platform agnostic. So it's not dependent on Zoom or Google Meets or WebEx or Cisco. We see it used both in person and virtual. And if folks want to find out, again, Harkness.ai is the best way to sort of get that integrated into your organization.
Right.
Oh
my goodness. Excellent stuff, Jason. I'm looking forward to extending the conversation in just a few minutes. But for all of you who've been watching the recording, you know that we try to aim for about a half hour worth of a recording, typically. And there are several things we would like you to do after you finish watching this, because I'm going to give you a few instructions and then we're going to hand it back to Jason for a final word. But for you, know that there is an attendance form just a little bit farther down the page. Let us know that you are here. That'll do a couple of things for you, by the way. If you are a visiting Rotarian, then successfully typing in your email address in that form means that it'll generate a note that you can pass along to your club secretary to make up a miss for your own club. And we all want. It is a great thing to have 100% attendance just because of the energy and encouragement that are a part of what Rotary does around the world. A little farther down the page, towards the bottom, you'll find the forum where you can engage in a conversation with those of us who are in this online and asynchronous club. Let us know what you thought, both of the program and of the other elements of the meeting as well. You can respond to people who have left comments there. Feel free. Just keep everything according to the 4-way test, right? We try to maintain that civility in the same way that harkness.ai is using data to try to encourage the same. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to our speaker for the final word. Jason, what would you like to have in people's heads as they leave their videos?
Thank you. I just appreciate the opportunity to talk about something that me and our team are quite passionate about. And that's really, as you said, Rushton, using incredibly powerful tools that will change the course of human history to usher in an era of civility, service, and culture. We are adapting to this new thing. I'm looking at folks that would take quite literally thousands of dollars to have met in person, but for free, we're able to connect from literally all over the world. And to the extent that our company can play a role in helping establish and bringing out the best in human culture that transcends time zone, that transcends language, that transcends political belief. That's something that we're really, really excited about. And if that could be a small part my legacy, I'd be very, very happy with that. So again, thank you for having us. God bless.
Wonderful, wonderful. Everyone, thank you for being part of this, and we will see you next week.